The visibility graphics overrides in a project change the way that an object displays in a specific view. In this case, different kinds of curtain walls have different line thicknesses, whether it's associated with emulsions or whether or not it's a panel. Also, if we zoom back out, even our walls have different line thicknesses around here, while the pattern on the inside is a thinner line weight. Certain objects in Revit can actually have the colors of blue and green and red. You can give it any color that you want. So these do not have to be limited to being just the color of black like we've seen up to this point. Visibility graphics can assign those colors as well. Also, where we see the structural grids, this line style, this can be adjusted from being a center line to a hidden line to being a solid line through the visibility graphics and the properties underneath the visibility graphics for this type of object. Visibility graphics also control whether or not an object is on or off. So if you wanted to turn the dimensions off, or if you wanted to turn all of your walls off, you could do that through your visibility graphics. Those visibility graphics settings can be accessed one of two different ways. You can type the letter V for visibility graphics, like visibility, twice on the keyboard to bring up the visibility graphics dialog. The other way is underneath the properties of the view, select the edit button next to visibility graphics. And it brings up this visibility graphics overrides dialog box. It's called visibility graphics overrides because it overrides the default settings just in this one view. If you want to change those settings throughout every view in your project, you can do that by selecting on Object Styles. In the Object Styles, we can see such things as doors, walls, windows. Really, just about every object inside of Revit will show up here underneath the Object Styles. In this case, if we take a look at walls, we can see that a line weight of 2, which is a very light line weight, is associated with these walls whenever they're in a projection view. Now, a projection view is usually associated with elevations. So if you're looking at it straight on, that's a projection view. A line weight of 5, which is a much darker line weight, is associated when you cut through a wall. Cutting through a wall would happen in floor plane views because you're cutting through the floor plan through the walls at a certain elevation. Cutting through the wall would also take place inside of wall sections. So in wall sections and floor plan views, the walls are going to be darker, but if we're just looking at it in elevation, the walls are going to be lighter. The reason why the walls look the certain color that they do is because of the line color associated with those walls. We'll also see that there's a line pattern. This is the dash, solid, hidden. And if we click inside of this dialog, we can see a pull down of all the different line styles that are available to us. Now, this is the project-wide settings, and if nothing gets changed in the visibility graphics overrides, this is how the walls will display in every view in the project. Now I'm going to click on OK to that. But if in the visibility graphics overrides, we said, in this view in the project, we want the walls to display different, we could do that. Scroll down to the walls, highlight where the category of wall is at, and when you do, you'll see override boxes in each of these locations. For instance, underneath cut, this is where the wall section or the floor plane view would take place. I'm going to select on overrides in the walls line. So override. From here, I could override the line weight with any line weight that I wanted. I can make the color of the walls change. So I can make all my walls red or blue or green. I could change the pattern so that all my walls look differently. They wouldn't even be solid lines. They could be dash lines or hidden lines. Those settings can all be changed through here. And if you've changed them and then you want to come back and just wipe out any of those changes, you can always click on the clear overrides box to get rid of any of the changes that you've made. In this case, I haven't really done anything, so I can either click on cancel or OK to this. Actually, it looks like I'd selected on one of the line types, so it's showing up as the walls as having a solid line type here. In fact, if I'd said red or dashed or any other properties, we'd be able to see that in this preview box right here for this particular override. In this case, though, I want to set it back, so I'm going to click back on the box, and I'm going to say Clear Overrides, and click on OK. And now we can see that that override has been cleared out, and it just says Override again. Also, if I come over here and click the box right next to walls and clear out that check mark, and then come down to OK, we'll see that all the walls will now disappear in the project. Probably not what we want, but it gets the point across that if you click the checkbox next to that particular category, then if it's cleared out, those objects will disappear. But if there is a check in it, they'll show back up again. And we can see that if we go back into the visibility graphics and then put a check back next to the walls category. And click on OK. So the visibility graphics overrides affect the way that each individual view displays. The object styles affect the way that objects display across the project, but the visibility graphics overrides will affect the way that those objects display in this specific view. Temporary view properties allow us to change the properties of a view temporarily so that we can see the information that we need to see without permanently changing that information inside of the view. Move your cursor down to the bottom of the view and select on the button called Temporary View Properties. Then, click on Enable Temporary View Properties. When you do that, you'll see this blue or purple line going around the perimeter of your view. This means that temporarily, any changes that we make to the view properties will only be effective just temporarily. By clicking on that box again, we will then be able to shut off any changes that we make to the view properties. Move your cursor down and then select the Visual Styles button. Then click on Hidden Line. Temporarily, we've turned all the colors off, and now we're just seeing this as a black and white form. If we need to make a change in the visibility graphics, we can do that as well. Underneath Properties, select the Edit button next to Visibility Graphics, or just type the letter V twice on your keyboard. After opening up your Visibility Graphics dialog box, let's turn off the sight. And we can do that by scrolling down and clearing the check mark next to Topography. Also, let's turn off the roofs of the building, just so that we can see into our buildings. So clear the check mark next to Roofs, and click on OK. Now, temporarily, the sight and the roofs of our buildings have been shut off. If we want to bring those back, it's very easy for us to do. Instead of going through that process that we just went through, all we need to do is go down to the Temporary View Properties button and select on Restore the View Properties. And it will restore those view properties to their previous state. Another option that it has is select on the Temporary View Properties button one more time, and we can apply a view template to the view. View templates are predefined states as to how a view should look. Select on Enable the Temporary View Properties, and now click on Export to Civil Engineering. This was a view template that was already in the project, and we can see that such things as the exterior walls, the topography, and a few other items have now been visually shut off. To turn that back on again, once again, Temporary View Properties button, and Restore View Properties. So the Temporary View Properties button allows you to temporarily change the graphics that you see inside of a view. Revit has a property that allows it to hide elements as well as reveal hidden elements. To hide an element in Revit, in this case we're going to go into this 3D view. The element I'd like to hide is going to be the roof. Move your mouse over to the edge of the roof and then click when you get to select on the roof. Whenever you select on the roof, it gives a certain transparency level so we can see through it. But for this instance, I just want to hide the roof. Once it's been selected on, you can come down to the bottom of the screen and click on this Temporary Hide Isolate button. It looks like a pair of little eyeglasses. Now there's 4 different things that we can do. Ultimately, we'll pick on Hide Element, and that's just going to hide this thing that we have selected. We could isolate the element, which will only show the object that we have selected. We could hide the category, which would hide all the roofs in the project. So not only would this roof hide, but this roof over here would hide as well. Or we could isolate the category, which would mean only the roofs in the project would show up. In this case, I just want to hide the roof. So I'm going to select on Hide Element. Another example of where we might want to use that would be in the case of this wall here. We might want to select on the wall, just so that we can see through the wall to get a better idea as to what's behind it. When you select on it, it does give it a transparency level, so you may not need to hide it. But if you do, once again, you can come back down to the bottom of the screen and select Hide Element again. And now it's just going to hide that wall. Now, if we want to get these walls back in a hurry, we can do it. Come down here, select the Temporary Hide Isolate button, and if you select on Reset Temporary Hide Isolate, those objects will immediately come back. Another option that we have, though, is to be able to hide the entire category of object, or be able to hide it permanently. If we do that, we just move our mouse over, and in this case, I'm going to hide the topography. So I zoomed out, I'm going to select on the site, come down here to the little eyeglasses, and in this case, we're going to hide this element. It's hidden, but there's a property about Temporary Hide Isolate that I should let you know. Just because it's temporarily hidden, and we can tell that by the cyan color border around the edge, it's still going to plot. If we don't want this object to plot and we want it to stay hidden, we click on the little eyeglasses again and apply the Hide Isolate to the view. Now it'll stay hidden inside of this view, and if we decided to spin this around by holding Shift down as well as the wheel, we'll be able to look at this from any direction without the sight getting in the way of our line of vision. But there's a very good chance, though, that we'll want to, at some point, bring this sight back. Unfortunately, though, after we've applied the Hide Isolate to the view, we can no longer tell it to reset the Temporary Hide Isolate because, well, it's already been applied. So to bring it back, we have to click the button right next to the little eyeglasses, which is Reveal Hidden Elements. So if you select the little light bulb tool, here we can see everything that was hidden in the view. And in this case, the main thing is going to be the sight. So if you select back on that site, come up here on the ribbon, and then select Unhide Element. That site at this point has now come back. If we click off of it now, we can see it's no longer that color that it was. It's the same color as everything else in the view. Now you can either click on the big X, or come back down here and click on the light bulb, and we can see that the site has now been brought back in the view. So if you want to be able to hide, or be able to see only specific objects, all you have to do is select on that object first. I've selected on a little bush. Select on the little eyeglasses. I'm going to select on Isolate Element. And now only that one plant right there is showing up. If you want to bring it back, if you've applied the Hide Isolate to the view, then you'll need to select on the Reveal Hidden Elements tool, which looks like a little light bulb to bring it back. But if you haven't applied the Hide Isolate to the view, just select Reset Temporary Hide Isolate, and everything else in your view will come back into the scene. A view's visual style affects the way that that view displays, and we can find the visual style on the bar going across the bottom of that specific view. In this case, the second box over is called Visual Style. Just select on that box. When you do, you'll see that there's really 6 different main visual styles. One is called Wireframe, and then it progresses on through Hidden Line, Shaded, Consistent Colors, Realistic, and Ray Trace. Wireframe is one of the least used ones, but it does have its place. Wireframe does 2 things very well. First, it allows you to select objects that otherwise might be difficult to get to. So, if you needed to grab onto a ceiling or a roof, objects that otherwise might be sort of obscured by the lines that make up walls or other kinds of objects, by turning Wireframe on, it means you can then reach up and then highlight on that roof object, which otherwise may have been nearly impossible to grab because it would have tried to select the wall instead. Another good feature about Wireframe is it's the fastest mode for Revit to process. If you have a very large model and you're trying to spin it around and see it from a certain direction, but the model is very slow in its processing, which happens from time to time, then turn on Wireframe and it'll tend to be much faster. If we click down here again, changes the hidden line, almost all of your construction documents are going to be done in hidden line mode. Shaded? Shaded will just add different shade to this. We can see that it's light here, but there's shade applied here, and there's shadows on the floor inside of the building. Consistent colors? It's a lot like shaded, except it gets rid of the shade. Essentially, it keeps the colors intact, but it removes that shade so everything is the exact same tone if it's the same material. The next one is realistic. This is a very good example of where it looks pretty realistic. Other times it doesn't look very realistic at all. But what realistic mode will do is if there's brick or block, it'll show it as being that kind of brick or block. If it's glass material, you'll be able to tell it's glass material. And of course, if it's plants like we see here, we'll finally be able to tell what that plant is going to look like when it comes time to render it. Now, ray trace mode is by far the slowest mode. And if you have a slow computer, you can expect ray trace mode to take a good long time to process. As we're looking at this regenerate on the screen, we're starting to see certain dots begin to go away. Ray trace will continue to look better and better and better the longer you let it sit there and wait. Ray trace is doing a rendering on the fly on the screen. In fact, it's even possible to zoom in and zoom out while you're in ray trace mode. The only problem is, though, is that it takes Revit a long time to process that. So unless you have just a blazing computer, it probably won't be able to keep up. So I usually recommend not using it. But as we can see, it gives you a pretty good visual. And if I'd let this wait for 2 or 3 minutes, it would look like a rendering whenever it was done. To get out of ray trace mode, select on the stop button and then click on close. It'll take you out of the ray trace mode and drop you back into whatever the previous mode is that you were in before. So your visual styles allow you to see your model, whether it's in a 3D view, and this works in plan views as well, in a variety of different ways. The two that you're going to use the most often will be hidden line, because that's where you're going to do your construction documentation in, and shaded, because it shows all your different components, such as block wall, and the glass that makes up these curtain walls, with the general color and appearance without taking a very long time to process that information. In Revit 2015, Autodesk introduced a new feature called Sketchy Lines. If you move your cursor down and then select on the Visual Styles button, move your cursor up, then select on Graphic Display Options. From the Graphic Display Options dialog box, expand out Sketchy Lines by clicking on the little triangle to the left of the word Sketchy Lines. You will see an option that says Enable Sketchy Lines. Put a check mark next to that, and two options will appear. One is called Jitter, the other Extension. Jitter will make your lines very squiggly. So if we click on this bar here, pull it far over toward the right-hand side, then click on Apply, we can now see in the 3D view that we have some squiggly lines that make up our building. If we click on OK, then zoom in toward one of the corners of the building, we should be able to see this quite a bit better. And wherever this cursor is located at, when we spun the wheel on the mouse, that's how we zoomed in to the upper corner of the building. If we want to change this further, we can do that by once again coming back down here to the Visual Styles button, Graphic Display Options, expanding out Sketchy Lines, and now expand out Extension. Extension will add an extension line to the end of this squiggly line. If we click on Apply, we can now see the lines extend beyond the edges whenever the line gets to the end of where it's supposed to be drawn. If we need to further modify this to make it the way that we want to see it, we can pull the bar over, or we can even type in the number in one of the boxes. In this case, I'm making them both 5, select on Apply, and now we can see that it's less wavy and there's less of an extension on the end. If we would click on OK at this point, it would now leave these wavy lines as well as the extension lines here inside of this view. Also, we could clear out Enable Sketchy Lines, click on OK, then zoom out by just spinning the wheel on the mouse again, and we can see that by shutting off that setting, those lines will no longer show up as being squiggled or longer here inside of the view. Revit has a tool called the Line Work tool that greatly aids in our design communication. This is how it works. If we zoom in here on the south elevation of our building, we'll see that this curtain wall that goes around the outside of the building is currently a really light line weight. Really, it's almost a lighter line weight than these walls that show up on this building over here. The issue is this building is in the distance, and I'd like to have the lines that go around the perimeter of this to be nice and dark. To accomplish that, one of the tools I could use would be that line work tool. To begin, select on my object first. Then I'm going to come up here and select on the line work tool. Next, select on a wide line. Now, any line that I click on will instantly become a dark line, a wide line. And I could click each of these spots, come to the other side of my building, click on those lines, and fairly quickly be able to generate dark lines in each of these locations in order to help pop this building out. And I could do the same thing going up across the top of the building. Then when it came time to print, even though it doesn't look that much different from zoomed out here, those lines would be much darker and it would look like this part of the building was standing out. And that's by using the line work tool. But the line work tool also has another nice feature. It works in 3D views as well. So, come into a 3D view. The garage door isn't too bad, but maybe there's too many lines here, or maybe these lines surrounding this are just a little bit too dark for our 3D model. We could instead come up here to where it has wide lines, and we could choose either thin lines and start to thin some of these lines out so they're nowhere nearly as dark as they were, or by picking on invisible lines, it'll remove those lines altogether. Now that object is still going to show up, but the line work that's associated with it will no longer be in that place. And in this case, there's some extra lines here, and I'm just having to click to get rid of those extra lines that show up around that edge. And where it gets really interesting is I can hold down the Shift key and hold down the wheel on my mouse and gently move this from side to side, or even begin to rotate this around if you're careful. And you'll see that it continues to be hidden even though we've used the line work tool and it's moving up and down. It knows that those lines should continue to stay whatever line weight it is that we gave it with the line work tool. So the line work tool can be used to punch out certain lines on the sides of buildings or remove lines that we don't need to see. It's great for documentation, and it's great for just tweaking individual lines, whether it be in section views, elevation views, or plan views, so that they display properly when it comes time to print out our documents.